what cultural traditions in the Western world have had a concept of stewardship in their folklore, writings, and teachings for thousands of years, not just a couple of centuries? The answer, of course, is our religious and faith traditions, even if that stewardship dimension has sometimes been perverted or suppressed or neglected or even forgotten. On this continent, consider in particular the religious traditions of our Aboriginal people and those associated with the Judeo-Christian faith. I mention this because I see a revival of interest in the stewardship aspects of those traditions, and I think this is an important development. There are others here who can speak more authoritatively on the concept of stewardship as practiced by Canada's Aboriginals, but that's a huge subject in itself, and it's worth not forgetting. And there are others that can speak more authoritatively than I can on the intimate connection between the ancient Jewish people and the land. If you read the books of Moses, there's all these moral laws. About a third of it, though, is on how to govern your relationship to the land, which is an environmental stewardship concept. I personally come from an evangelical Christian tradition. I can say from my knowledge of that community that there is a revival of interest there in environmental stewardship as a faith imperative. And some of these religious communities are of such a size and influence that they could make quite an impact environmentally and politically if they ever decided to use that influence to practice and demonstrate and support a stewardship and sustainability agenda. To illustrate, here in Calgary, Calgary is represented in the federal parliament by 8 members of parliament. They all have offices in Calgary. They have offices in Ottawa. They employ about 40 people, about 20 of them here, 20 of them in Ottawa, and they have a combined budget of 5 million people. That's the scale of the political representation at the federal level from the city of Calgary. The 10 biggest evangelical churches in Canada, in Calgary alone, employ 325 full-time people, have a weekly attendance of 16,800 people, and have a combined budget of 27 billion people. Now, if you don't think groups like that can have an influence, if they apply that influence to demonstrating, not so much preaching, demonstrating a practice of environmental sustainability, these are potential sources of support. So I think it's important to add the recognition and encouragement of a revival of religiously motivated environmental stewardship to our roadmap to sustainability. And the sustainability movement needs all the allies it can get, including those. But now to continue with the analogy of harnessing other powerful horses' influences to the sustainability chuck wagon, of course there's a role for government regulation in the attainment of environmental sustainability. But one of the main problems, and it's referred to in quite a lot of detail in this report, is that this function is uncoordinated and split in Canada between at least 3 jurisdictions, sometimes more. And if you examine the environmental policy statements of the federal government, the provincial governments across the country, you find, of course, innumerable references to regulation in the name of environmental conservation and sustainability. What you don't find is clear recognition of the fact that our ecosystems do not respect political and constitutional boundaries, or they don't respect provincial or territorial or even international boundaries. And that split jurisdictional responsibility for the environment often leads to duplication and an inability to hold anybody accountable for successes or failures. So this happens all the time in these split jurisdiction areas. It happens in healthcare. People complain about the healthcare, and they go to the Edmonton or they go to the provincial capital, and they say, that's not it's the federal guys, it's their act. And you go to Ottawa and say, you complain about the waiting lines in Ottawa, say, look, it's basically a provincial responsibility. These split jurisdiction areas not only kind of paralyze doing anything, they make it impossible to find out who is accountable for either the success or the failure or anything in between. When we speak, therefore, for example, of regulating in the name of sustainability or conservation, some aspect, let's say the Saskatchewan river system, water quality, water volumes, fish populations, and so forth, what we have on that watershed is a multiplicity of overlapping authorities and regulations involving the federal government, several provincial governments, even municipal governments, some Aboriginal governments, with the result that both the efficiency and regulation, accountability for results has been greatly reduced. Is there an alternative? Yes, there is. And that is the establishment of a single ecosystem-based regulatory authority, say for the Saskatchewan River watershed, to which the federal government, the provincial governments of the three prairie provinces, and affected municipal governments delegate their authority in order to provide one-window ecosystem-based regulation. Legally, that is not impossible, but it's a way of trying to fix this jurisdictional split that just prevents things from happening. So I suggest that a formal experiment with one-window ecosystem-based regulation of a watershed, and you could debate which watershed, ought to be another important item on any roadmap to sustainability. Now, finally, if you want to secure the attention and support of practicing politicians for national sustainability goals, if you want to secure increased support and funding for the implementation of the roadmap to sustainability that will come out of this conference, in my view, there's no substitute for harnessing grassroots political energy and advocacy to those tasks. And one of the most effective ways of doing that is through the conduct of organized issue campaigns. Now, an issue campaign is organized like an election campaign. It's got a beginning and an end. That's why it's easy to recruit people to it. You say, look, join our issue campaign for sustainability. We're not asking you to sign your life away for 30 years. We're asking you just to give us 6 months or 8 months. It's going to start here. It's going to have an end. Sometimes you can get them for 30 years if you can get them for 6 or 8, but you start by a manageable demand. And an issue campaign is organized, I say, like an election campaign. You have a campaign team, a campaign management team, a campaign director, a fundraising effort, a volunteer effort, a communications effort, an event planning effort, just like the positions on the team are the same on an election campaign team. But the object of an issue campaign is not to get somebody elected. The object is to raise some issue like sustainability or some action like implementing a sustainability road plan, higher on the agendas of the public and the politicians and the parties and the governments that it would otherwise be. So often you start issue campaigns with a full-blown public opinion survey to say, where is my issue in the constellation of the things the public's worried about? If it's not high enough, like if it's down, you ask the public what's your top of mind concern today and they don't mention your issue, then your first task of your issue campaign is to get it up. And so you run this campaign to get your issue up into the top 5 so that when the politicians send out their pollsters, they come back and say, something funny, but since last time we did this sustainability thing has been mentioned more often. Your object is to get it up high. And that's the way you get attention of these people. Or maybe your issue is high, like environment is high, remarkably high. So maybe the object of the issue campaign is not to get people to say this is important, but to start saying they support some plan for addressing it. Why don't you do something about that roadmap to sustainability? If the pollster starts coming back, 20% of the people are saying, why don't you implement that roadmap to sustainability? And 3 months later they come back and say, no, it's 30% people are saying that. And now 40% of people are saying that. Like when I represented Calgary Southwest in the Parliament, the pollster came back to me and said, 40% of your people believe the moon is made out of green cheese. I would have a speech next time at the town hall meeting saying, there may be something about green cheese and the moon. I might not commit to it, but this is on the mind of your constituents. And you better, if you're a small d Democrat politician, you better reflect on that. And that's the purpose of these issue campaigns.